Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Welcome back to another episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? This is part 16 for the weekend ending on December 3rd, 2023, and two new movies premiered at the box office. And please remember to like this video, please press the red subscribe button to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. First, we'll do a quick recap of our movie contestants whose theatrical runs have already ended, and those movies include The Flash, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, Haunted Mansion, and Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. The production budgets for each of these four movies, as shown in this chart, range from a low of $157.8 million to a high of $300 million. And we can estimate a break-even point range for each movie by multiplying each movie's production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. We can visualize the estimated break-even point ranges along with the final global gross box office revenue earned by each movie in this next chart, which clearly shows just how much lower each of the movies' earnings were as compared to their respective break-even point ranges. And when we subtract each of the movie's final global gross box office revenues from their respective break-even point ranges, we'll get a range of losses in terms of global gross box office revenue that will then divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves. The resulting quotients are the estimated range of losses suffered by each studio that's responsible for producing each of these four movies that all flopped in theaters. The Flash, whose losses range from $239.7 million to $314.7 million, currently sits in first place. Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, whose losses range from $176.4 million to $250.1 million, currently sits in third place. Haunted Mansion, whose losses range from $138.6 million to $178 million, currently sits in fifth place. And finally, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, whose losses range from $78.8 million to $151.3 million, currently sits in sixth place. And one of our current contestants currently sits in second place. So please give a warm welcome to the entry from Disney and Marvel Studios that slipped way down into 11th place overall in this weekend's domestic box office. The very woke 33rd MCU movie entitled The Marvels, starring Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson. For its fourth weekend at the box office, domestically it earned another $2.5 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $80.7 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $6.1 million to bring its international box office total up to $116.3 million. So globally, the movie earned another $10 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $197 million. That places the current domestic share for The Marvels at 40.98%, which is slightly lower than last week and is still lower than the franchise average domestic share of 41.43%, but well within one standard deviation. Since the movie's average weekly drop is still rather high, I will continue to project the movie's final domestic box office by using the franchise average weekly drop of 37.68% and one standard deviation above and below for a range from 31.94% to 43.42%. Thus, using the range of average weekly drops, I can project that the movie's final domestic box office may fall somewhere within the range from $85.9 million at the low end, $87.1 million at the mid-range, to $89 million at the upper end of the range, which is a lower range overall than last week, and it clearly shows that the movie is not going to break $100 million domestically. So this effectively means that The Marvels is going to become the MCU's lowest grossing film domestically of all time. Not only that, this is a crushing defeat for Disney and Marvel Studios, as well as their respective heads, Bob Iger and Kevin Feige, because using the movie's current domestic share of 40.98%, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office will only be somewhere within the range from $209.7 million at the low end $212.7 million at the mid-range, and only $217.1 million at the upper end, which is also a drop from last week's projection, indicating that the movie will most definitely become the MCU's lowest grossing movie worldwide of all time. Given that the movie has a production budget of $274.8 million, we can calculate an estimated break-even point range by multiplying that by 2.5 and 3.0, which yields values ranging from $687 million to $824.4 million. And when we subtract the movie's range of possible final global gross box office values from the estimated break-even point range, we get a range of possible losses from $469.9 million to $614.7 million in global gross box office revenue. When we divide that range by 2, we get a possible range of losses for Disney and Marvel Studios ranging from $234.9 million to $307.4 million, which brings the movie much closer to the range that The Flash has, but still barely in second place. So there is a distinct possibility that the Marvels may overtake The Flash to take first place for biggest flop if its losses continue to grow. Now let's have a warm welcome for Lionsgate's movie The Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that stars Rachel Zegler. This was its third weekend in theaters, and it fell to second place overall at this weekend's domestic box office. Domestically, the movie earned another $14.5 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $121.2 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $23.8 million to bring its international box office total up to $122.7 million. So globally, the movie earned another $46.7 million to bring its current global box office total up to $243.9 million, which is just barely below the movie's estimated break-even point of $250 million, which we obtained by multiplying the movie's production budget of $100 million by 2.5. Thus, the movie is most definitely going to break even and will most likely end up with a final global gross box office total between $308 million at the low end, $322.1 million at the mid-range, and $340.3 million at the upper end. Now let's have a warm welcome for our contestant from Disney, the animated movie Wish, which dropped down to 5th place in this weekend's domestic box office. The movie earned another $7.4 million domestically to bring its domestic box office total up to $42 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $17.3 million to bring its international box office total up to $39.6 million. Globally, the movie earned another $32.6 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $81.6 million. So using a possible range of average weekly drops ranging from 30 to 40%, we get the following range of possible final domestic box office values ranging from a low of $57.3 million on the low end, $61 million at the mid-range, and $65.8 million at the upper end, which is considerably lower than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 51.44%, the movie's possible final global gross box office revenue may only range from $111.5 million on the low end, $118.5 million at the mid-range, and $127.9 million at the upper end, which is also lower than last week's projection, putting it even further below the movie's estimated break-even point of $500 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5. So this movie may lose somewhere on the order of $372.1 million to $388.5 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when we divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, leaves a range of possible losses for Disney ranging from $186 million to $194.3 million. And that's still high enough to keep Wish in 4th place behind Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction. And that brings us to our entry from Columbia Pictures and Apple Film, Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix. Domestically, the movie earned another $7.1 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $45.7 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $44.6 million to bring its international box office total up to $90.9 million. So globally, the movie earned another $57.8 million to bring its current global box office total up to $136.6 million. Using a range of possible average weekly drops of 30 to 40%, I can project that the movie's final domestic box office revenue may range from $65.6 million at the low end, $70.3 million at the mid-range, and $76.5 million at the upper end. And with a current domestic share of 33.47%, we get a range of possible final global gross box office values ranging from $196 million at the low end, $210 million at the mid-range, and $228.6 million at the upper end, which is nowhere near the estimated break-even point of $500 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5. So Napoleon may lose somewhere on the order of $271.4 million to $304 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when we divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that we get a potential range of losses for Columbia Pictures and Apple Film of $135.7 million to $152 million, which is still incredibly close to the range of losses estimated for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, keeping it in a statistical tie. One of the two movies that opened this weekend is the Japanese movie by Toho Studios entitled Godzilla Minus One, which earned $34 million in global gross box office revenue. But since it has such a small production budget of only $15 million, the movie has a very good chance of breaking even. The other movie that opened this weekend is entitled Renaissance, a film by Beyoncé, and in spite of it being number 1 at this weekend's domestic box office ahead of Godzilla Minus One, it only earned $21 million domestically and $6.4 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend box office total of a mere $27.4 million. Now, given that the movie's production budget hasn't been reported, I don't expect it to be that high, but using an average weekly drop of 30 to 40% and its current domestic share of 76.64%, the movie may earn somewhere on the order of $68.5 million on the low end, $78.3 million at the mid-range, to $91.2 million at the upper end in global gross box office revenue. So provided that the movie's production budget is not greater than $30 million, the movie could break even unless the production budget is significantly higher than that. So to recap, The Flash remains in first place, The Marvels remains in second place, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction remains in third place, Wish remains in fourth place, Haunted Mansion remains in fifth place, and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 remains tied with Napoleon in a statistical tie for sixth place. So be sure to tune in next week for another exciting episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.